Okay. Last time we met, last week, and we were again looking at diagramming, doing some diagramming together, and got in a discussion as we were approaching this fourth step of block diagramming or structural diagramming. And as I was going through the procedure for it, where we talked about, again, the first step is identify the first independent clause that you see in the sentence or in the passage, and then identify the rest of the phrases and clauses by finding the connector words. And then we got into a discussion about some of the connector words and infinitives and things like that. So that was a focus last time. I mentioned in the syllabus you can find more details about that. In fact, the syllabus that I handed out to you guys when we met together in October, I was just gonna open that real quick to show you the section where we can find it, if I can. There it is. Okay, so syllabus here, this was the one that I gave to you guys in class, I believe. And if you go to page, I think it's 40 something, if I remember right. Let me see here. Yeah, so in the section on, oh, is that the right one? Yeah, I think maybe it was this one. Sorry, guys, pulled up the wrong one. Let me try this again. Here we go. All right, this one. Okay, sorry about that. So this is the one I handed out to you guys, and I think if you go around page, let's see, 13, around page, was it 30? Here we go. Now I found it. Okay, page 38. I put in a section here where we talked about infinitives. So I gave you some examples and then how they work, how they function. I don't think we covered this in the class. We started talking about it last week, but so I have, there's in the notes, goes through infinitives, and then I also talk about indirect objects as well. So you can read in the notes information regarding indirect objects, and then some exercises, and then I also talked more detail about participles as well. I think that's at an earlier section up in oh, you know what? Yeah, so I put this syllabus on Canvas, and I also put my teacher syllabus on Canvas, which has some even more information, and you can go to Canvas and download that on the Module 5 section if you want to get more details on that or more information. For those more specialized topics in diagramming. So maybe if there's time a little later, we can go through some of that. But what I wanted to do was to move our attention to doing some more examples together, because I think that's what can help us most in trying to learn it. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and have us jump into diagramming this passage. We did a little bit of this in class, but I wanted to cover it with you here. We did a few weeks ago, we did the first couple of verses, the introduction, and now these are the verses 3 to 5 of the first chapter. So this is as the body of the epistle begins. I wanted to have us diagram that together, and then of course you can apply this to your the diagramming assignment. But what I thought I would do is just first give you guys a little bit of time to do the step, and then we come back together and go over it. For this first one, I'm just going to ask John if you could read 2 Timothy 1:3-5 as it's here on the screen. Can you guys see that?
Yes, Pastor Tim.
Okay, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. 2 Timothy 1:3-5. I am grateful to God, whom I serve with a clear conscience, the way my forefathers did, as I unceasingly remember you in my prayers night and day, longing to see you, having remembered your tears, so that I may be filled with joy, being reminded of the unhypocritical faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I'm convinced that it is in you as well.
All right, great. So taking a look at this, maybe John, you can see what you think. Where's the first independent clause that we see here?
I am grateful to God, Pastor Tim.
Yes, it's actually right at the beginning in this case. So usually they're near the beginning, but in this case, it's right at the beginning. So now there may be other independent clauses in the paragraph, but I think it's easier to just find the first one and then go from there to identify any others that we come across along the way. So with that, that's our first step. The second is now to identify the remaining phrases and clauses. And how we do that is to look for the connector words, which again, I remind you, assignment 5.11 is to find the connector words for all the connector words in 2 Timothy. And some of you have finished that assignment. But for this part, so that's really a step we would need to take for diagramming the book of 2 Timothy, which is assignment 5.12. But for here, let's go through together. Let me, I'll start with, let me ask Joshua, if you're there, to identify the connector words that you see in verse 3. Are you there, Joshua? Okay.
I'm here. To.
Okay. And that's a preposition, right? Whom. That's a relative pronoun.
That's a pronoun.
The.
With.
With, yep. What is that? What kind of connector word?
Preposition.
Yeah, it's a preposition. Any more?
I don't know exactly.
Sorry, which one?
Sorry, as.
Yeah, actually, as is connector word here. Conjunction. Any more?
In.
Okay. Preposition. And then and that is a conjunction. Good. That's all of them. Good job. All right, let me ask Vikmar, if you're there. Can
Yes,
you do verse 4? Good morning.
Good morning. Conjunctions, the having.
Having.
Longing.
Having is what? What kind of connector word is having remembered?
Wait.
Remember?
I get my
That's fine. You can look at the, if you want to go back up here. Okay. If you remember this category of participles, remember that's a verb with the ing ending.
yeah, participles.
Yeah. And no subject or article or verb of being. So that's what we see here. There's no subject, there's no article, no verb of being. Okay, so good. Any other connector words you see?
Longing to see.
Yeah, longing is also a participle. Now, what about this to here? That usually we think of that as a, sorry, go ahead.
It's a B form? Or
Yeah.
the verb?
Yeah, what follows the word to? What comes after
It's
it?
the verb.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so is this a preposition? Or is it something else?
It's something else.
Yeah, this is what we were talking about last week.
Mhm.
It's whenever you have to plus a verb, that is an infinitive. That's what we were talking about last week. If you have to plus a noun, that's just a preposition. That to is a preposition. So in this case, to see is actually to is not a connector word here. It's actually an infinitive, which I put in green. All right. Okay, that's a little bit more of a challenge. Do you see any connector words? Any remaining ones
So,
here?
so,
Yes, good. Or so that actually comes together. Do you remember what
Okay.
kind is that?
the
that a-
conjunction.
Very good. Yes. Conjunction. All right, good. Any others?
I think that's all for this verse.
Okay. I see one more.
With
Yes.
joy.
There you go. Good. All right, great job. Okay, let me ask Narelle. You get to do verse 5.
Of assertive.
Yes. Are you there?
Of.
Okay.
Yeah. Of.
Of here. Okay, this is whoops. Okay, there we go. All right. What else do you see?
Which.
Okay, relative pronoun.
Okay.
In. Yep, that's a preposition. Good.
And.
Yes. Conjunction.
Another and.
Yep. Another conjunction. Any others?
As.
All right. I'll just
In. Doth. Assertive.
sorry.
Doth.
That this one? That? Sorry. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Any others?
Being reminded.
Yes, that's a participle. Notice there's no subject, there's no article, there's no verb of being in front of it. So that's a participle. Good. Anything else?
In.
In. Yes.
Yeah.
Preposition.
Within.
Within. Yes. That's another preposition.
Within. Yes. Within.
Yeah.
Yeah. Within. Within. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Now there's a couple things here. This is the part where we got, the challenges with the English language. The first is this of here. Now, normally of is a preposition. Here, it's actually part of the verb. So there are some verbs in English where it's a verb followed by a preposition. And those are often in English called prepositional verbs. We talked about this a little bit, but they are another challenge that English presents to us. And because literally, if if you're not sure whether or not, if you see something like this and you wonder, is this actually a preposition? Because what happens is this: if you see of that follows a verb, then normally that is part of the verb, the verbal idea. Okay. It is not modifying the verb. It's actually part of it. The way you can see this is, I'll show you in a little bit. We'll go to the actual, the interlinear, the Greek text, and I'll show you how this works. The other challenge in this verse is the word that. You remember that can be a relative pronoun, you know, like the word which, but that can also be so a relative pronoun would be
Conjunction.
yeah, it can also be a conjunction. So let me give you a couple examples. So if it's a relative pronoun, it would be like he hit the ball that was thrown to him. Okay. Here, that is a relative pronoun. It's describing the ball. Which ball? The ball that was thrown to him. Whereas you could also have a conjunction. He preached powerfully, so powerfully that the congregation repented. Okay, so this now is functioning like a conjunction. It's giving the result of how he preached. Or that can be like just a regular a pronoun. You can say I ate that. Okay. So that is filling in for a noun. Or that can function as what we call a direct object marker. That is, it introduces the object of the verb. And we see this a lot in statements like she said that she was tired. Okay, here it's introducing what she said. That's the object of said. She said what? She said that she was tired. Or another is, I know that you are hungry. All right, in this case, it's acting like it's introducing the object of know. I know what? I know that you are hungry. So, anybody confused? This is one of those words in the English language that's just a little bit tricky. We talked about the word for last week, right? Where sometimes the word for, you know, FOR, can be a conjunction or a preposition. And so we looked at some examples of that. Well, another English word that presents challenges at times is the word that. And it can operate, there's another couple more ways it can function. I won't get into, but so here we can see 4 particular ways that it functions. So what I do when I'm looking at the sentence here, I am convinced that it is in you as well. I think here the word that is actually, it's giving the object of the verb. I am convinced that it is in you. So the word that is introducing the object of the verb. What am I convinced of? That it is in you. All right. Now, you can check to see, okay, well, how is it working here? Is it a relative pronoun? The way I check that is I just put the word which in, and see if it makes sense. I am convinced which is it is in you. Does that make sense? It's like, no, we don't see that used that way in English. So it's not a relative pronoun. Okay. Is it a conjunction? It could be, but again, you want to ask, I am convinced that it is in you. Again, it's not giving us a result or a purpose or a result, right? Which is how normally that will function as when it's a conjunction. So it seems to be introducing the object phrase or object clause connected to convinced. I am convinced of what? That it is in you as well. So in this case, I don't think it's functioning as a connector word. It's continuing the sentence. I am convinced that it is in you. That all goes together as one clause. Okay. Any questions about that? About that, there you go. That is a pronoun. There's a few words like this.
So it's a pronoun, Pastor Tim. The that there.
In this verse, it's introducing the object. I am convinced of what is the idea. I am convinced that, and then he tells them what he's convinced of.
Okay.
So it's introducing this as the object of convinced. It's just used with certain words. I know that, she said that, I am happy that, I'm convinced that. Those are all examples where it's just the sentence is not complete until you fill in, I'm convinced of what? I am happy about what? She said what? Okay, remember an object of a sentence answers question what, right? He hit what? He hit the ball. She said what? She said hello. Or she said that she was happy. Right? I know what? I know English. So the object is, again, typically the object is describing, it's what the verb is, it's what the it's receiving the action of the verb. Okay, so in a sense, when you said she said, that's not a full sentence, right? The complete sentence is she said that she was happy. Or we could have said she said something, or she said hello. All these are examples of, I'll highlight it in blue here. These are all the object of the verb said. Okay. Just like the ball is the object of the verb hit, or just like English is the object of the verb know. Okay. Now, typically when you see that, it introduces a clause that's part of the object. I could have said, I know that he speaks English. Again, notice we have the word that he speaks English is the object of know. It's describing, I know what? I know that he speaks English. I know what? I know English. So what I've highlighted in blue here is functioning as the object of these clauses. Okay, it's like either the thing receiving the action or what the verb is doing. what the verb is referring to. So we have a subject, she, the verb said, and then what she said is acting like the object in the sentence. Does that make sense?
Yes, Pastor Tim.
Okay. Any questions on that? Anybody else have a question about that? This
None,
is
Pastor.
okay. These are part of the joys of dealing with the English language. So,
Thank you for this one.
okay. Yeah, so that's why I wanted to do these diagrams, because we're going to encounter these special cases as we go along. And you're going to see these when you're diagramming passages, and you need to know what they're doing there. And so the word that is a key word in English. It does a lot of different things, but it's important to know what it's doing. So here in this verse 4, we have so that. So there's the word that again, and it's part of the conjunction so that. Now, sometimes you may just see that, right? It may just be this. Longing to see you, having remembered your tears, that I may be filled with joy. That's functioning the same way as if we had had so that. It's a conjunction, giving the purpose or the reason. Having remembered, longing to see you so that, why am I longing to see you? So that I may be filled with joy. That's what's going on here. All right. Well, let's take this now that we have these connector words, and let's identify the phrases and clauses. And actually, I've done that here already. So that this step, I'm just gonna, at each connector word or punctuation mark, I'm going to just form the next phrase or clause, just following the connector words and then sometimes punctuation. Okay. Now, again, to see here is an infinitive, so it's not a connector word, so I don't break it there, but I break it at the participle, having remembered, because that's the next connector word, so that I may be filled with joy, being, and I would put being reminded together as a participle, and being reminded of. It's all the participle. Within, preposition, which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I'm convinced that it is in you as well. And we could break it here also. Okay, so that's how what we do is just break up the paragraph at each connector word, or sometimes punctuation marks. All right. Any questions on that? Okay, good.
So
So now, oh, sorry, Jesse, go
the
ahead.
word in is it a connector word in preposition
Yeah, where?
in the last sentence. And
Yeah,
I am convinced that it
is in you.
is.
Yeah, technically it's a preposition there, but what I'm going to do when I diagram it is I'm going to leave it all in one line, because it is what? So I usually will leave it in one line like that.
As Pastor Tim, it's not a conjunction.
Not in this case, because it's as well means also.
Mm,
One way to say also, or two. That it is in
Okay.
you also, or also in you.
okay, thank you, Pastor Tim.
Okay. Now, if as had been like, if there was a verb following it, so that then it would be a conjunction. I'm convinced that it is in you as it is in me. Okay. Now that is acting like a conjunction. It's followed by a clause, and it's telling us how it is in you. in the same way or as it is in me. Okay. But in this case, it's not followed by a clause. It's just followed by the adjective well, which means it's sort of an idiom really for the word also. It's another way to say also, which I don't know. They should have just translated it that way. I would have just said convinced it's in you also. Or I'm convinced it is also in you is how I would. That's how it is in the Greek text actually. This word also is like this. That's a little clearer to understand. But the LSB is not a perfect translation, so it did it this way. Okay. So taking that, now I'm just going to have all of these. These are all the phrases and clauses. What I'm going to ask you guys to do is just identify if it's a phrase or a clause, and then tell me how is it functioning in the sentence. That is, what word do you think it's modifying and how? And I'll start with the easy one. I am grateful, as John said, is an independent clause, right? It stands alone. Right? The
Yes.
subject is I, the verb is am, and then you remember we call it the subject complement is grateful, since it's a
Yes.
verb of being. Okay?
Yes.
Now, all right, Kent, we'll get you started on to God. Is that a phrase or a clause?
Praise.
All right. And what is it doing here? What do you think it's modifying and how?
I am grateful to God. How he is grateful.
Okay. Yeah, it could be. So technically it modifies am, it modifies the verb, and it could be telling
Telling
how
how.
or where.
Yeah.
Right. I am grateful
Uh,
to God. So it's the direction of that idea. But how, I think I think where would be a more likely.
yes.
Now I said it modifies am because it's answering. Remember we had discussion before about if it answers a question of where or why or how or purpose or reason, it's going to modify a verb. And so that's why it's telling us where the action or the condition, it's describing something about the action or the condition. In this case, it's telling us where he's directed his gratitude. I am to God grateful is the idea, right? Where is it? I
Okay.
am to God. Yeah. Kent? Do you have a question, Kent? Or
Where can we ask question? Where does Paul grateful?
yeah, where does he direct?
Okay.
I am to God grateful. That's how you can think of it. Okay. Whom I serve, Kent. Is that a phrase or a clause?
Clause.
What kind of clause? Is it independent or dependent?
Dependent.
How do we know that?
Dependent clause. Because there's no object or subject complement.
Okay. There isn't in this case, but he could have said whom I serve. Well, I don't know how you'd put an object there, but there's another reason that it's a dependent clause.
Because there is a verb and a noun.
Relative.
Yeah, it's a clause because there's a verb and a noun, a verb and a subject. But notice it's introduced by the word whom.
Whom. Yes.
So that's telling us it has to go somewhere else. It's modifying something else. In this case, what is it modifying?
God.
God. Yeah, telling who.
Who.
Okay. The
Yes.
word who is there. So
Where,
all right.
Who I'm served. Who I serve.
Now, yeah, the next one here With a clear conscience, is that a phrase or a clause?
Phrase,
Yeah, there's no verb, right? And what does it
Verb.
modify?
modify, serve.
Good. Telling what? How's it modifying it?
Okay, how, where, when. Oh,
How? Yes. How I serve. I serve with a
That's
clear
how.
conscience. That's how I serve. Now, in the original sentence up here, paragraph, I can get to it. Notice with a clear conscience, the way my forefathers did. Now, what I did was I broke it here. Let's put it down here. Okay, this was the verse. And notice here, I broke it though after conscience. But there's no connector word and there's no punctuation.
Yes.
So normally you'd say, okay, you'd leave. Originally, we had this situation where it'd be just this whole statement. With a clear conscience, the way my forefathers did. So normally there isn't any clue that indicates we should break it there from this translation.
Ellipsis. Us.
Well, or so normally this is, I'm sort of skipping a step here. Normally, okay, you do the diagram just with this translation. So you would say it's a in this case clause, because there's a verb here, did. You'd say a clause modifying serve, right? Telling how. But this is a little bit confusing because it's saying two things: with a clear conscience, the way my forefathers did. So one thing we can do. Sorry, did someone have a comment? Did somebody have a comment? Okay. So here's the LSB translation, right? The way my forefathers did. Actually, let's do it. The New American Standard, the way my forefathers did. Now, look at the ESV. As my ancestors did. Look at the NIV. As my forefathers did. New King James. As my forefathers did. Notice they put a connector word in, didn't they?
Yes.
The word as. In this case, it's acting like a conjunction because it's followed by a clause. My forefathers did. My forefathers is the subject, did is the verb. As my ancestors did. As my forefathers did, NIV. As my ancestors did, or as did my ancestors, ESV. So normally, right, as we've discussed, normally you'll do the diagram from your translation, you go through it, but then you want to come back and check other translations. Or you could skip that and just look at the interlinear, right? Which we can do. Just to see, okay, what is it? What's going on here? Can you guys see the interlinear here? You guys see it? Make it a little bigger.
Yes, Pastor.
Let me okay. All right. Just a little bigger. All right, so here's interlinear for 2 Timothy 1, verse 3, right? Thankful I am to God, whom I serve. Now here, notice, from my forefathers. You guys see that? And if I look at this word, apo, notice it says it's a preposition.
It's good.
which can mean from or as, is the idea. So here, actually, in the Greek text, there is a preposition, a connector word. But the English translation we were using didn't put it in. It used the phrase "the way," my forefathers did. I think a better translation would have just been to say "as," to reflect, better reflect the Greek text, which puts a connector word in there. Okay, so, and that's exactly, as we go back to looking at the translation comparison here, that's exactly how most English translations did it. But the New American Standard and the LSB did not. So this is just a reminder, guys, to, do your full diagram in the text you're using, but don't assume everything's fine. You need to double check it by either looking at other translations or going to the interlinear and just sort of comparing verse by verse and seeing, okay, is there a preposition, is there a connector word that was put in or left out here, or is this verb actually acting like a participle? And we've looked at some examples of that before. So you want to check to see, is the word a participle or acting like something else? And you can just go in here. So for example, verse 4, we saw the participle longing, right? So we say, well, is it really a participle in the Greek? And you can go here and notice, if you can read that, it's kind of small print. It says present participle, active. So yes, okay, the translation said participle, and it is. Or the next one, recalling or having remembered, he says, it's a participle.
Pastor Tim, I did
Yes.
not, we did not see the shared screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Telling you to look at this, and it's like, what? Look at what? Okay. Let me try this again. So we already talked about, so this is verse 3. So then I said, look at verse 4. If you remember, it had started with the part we thought was a participle, longing. And so we want to look here in the interlinear and see, okay, it tells us this is a present participle, active. Can you guys see that? The font's really small, but I can't change it. And then we remembered that the next one where he says in verse 4, having remembered, I think was the translation. Here it says recalling, which is probably a better way to say it. And it says here, it is also a participle. Okay. So this is just a reminder that when you're diagramming your passage, don't stop after you've done it with your translation. Your work's not yet done. You still need to confirm if the way that your translation did it, if there's anything you need to adjust. So for example, as we saw with our passage here, the way my forefathers did, actually in the Greek, it adds a connecting word there. So as, so that should be on a separate line. Even though in the translation, there was no punctuation and there was no connector word. So now sometimes something like that may slip by and you don't notice it. But you would notice it if you compared this verse 3 to other translations. You would have seen them have a little bit different. They would have had the word as, or it should just look kind of funny with a clear conscience, the way my forefathers did. That seems like two statements being made, right? So it seems like these should be separated, but there is no connector word that tells us that directly in this translation, but there is a connector word in the other translations as well as in the Greek text. Okay, so that's why I put it on another line. Questions on that? Cries of pain and suffering? So this is a dependent clause, and it modifies serve as well. It's dependent because it's introduced by, or the idea, right, is introduced by the word as, and it's telling us again how I serve, how the way my forefathers did, or as my forefathers did.
Amen.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Kent will give you one more. As I unceasingly remember you.
Dependent clause.
Very good.
Modifies yes, I unceasingly remember you. Serve.
Okay, it could modify serve, and then how would it be modifying it? Whom I serve as I unceasingly remember you? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Or it could be, right? I am grateful when? Right, telling when.
Yeah, when.
Okay, so if we realize it's answering the question when, it's not when I serve, it's when I am grateful.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Go back.
Okay, good. All right. Let's see, who's my next victim here? Ruel. You can't hide. God knows you're there, Ruel. It's your turn.
I'm not here.
Okay, whoever you are, can you tell us the next one? In my prayers, night. If that's a
In
phrase.
my prayers, night. In my walay day, night only day.
Yeah,
It's
yes,
a
night and
clause.
day. Is that a phrase or a clause?
It's a clause
Is there a verb?
about prayers.
Well, in this case, prayers is a noun in this case.
Oh, the praise.
Yeah. Praise is a
phrase.
verb. Prayers is a noun. So this is
Pray.
a phrase. What does it modify? Well, again, ask yourself, what question does it seem to answer? In my prayer.
Where?
Like aware, right? So if it's aware, it's going to modify a noun or a verb.
Verb.
Okay. And then so we want to do is, okay, let's look for the closest verb and see if it makes sense. What's the closest verb? Remember. I heard someone say that. Remember, right? That's the word verb nearest to it. So we go, okay.
Oh yeah, it modifies remember.
Does that make sense? I remember in my prayers.
Where did I remember?
Yeah. So it modifies remember, telling us where. Now, night and day. Because notice we have and day here in the next line. What's that connected to?
Night.
Prayer. Oh, connected to night. It's
Yeah, it's connected to night, right? But
when.
Yeah, it's
When,
answering
answering
when.
Modifying prayer.
Yes. Or it's in my prayers. Sorry, it's a phrase, modifies. Actually, remember, if it's answering the question where, it's going to modify a verb.
When?
The same with the first phrase.
Yes, it's modifying remember because it's telling us when. When do I remember? Night and day. Now,
Oh no.
I would do this
Yeah.
because night really is, it should be separate. I would put it on a separate line.
Yes, that's how I also Pastor Tim.
So I would do it this way. Night and day. Okay. Now this is again, we see another example, and this will happen in, most passages that you diagram. There may be one or two phrases or clauses that don't have a connector word in front of it or a punctuation mark. Like we've seen two examples here in verse 3. In my prayers, night and day are really modifying the when I remember. But there was no comma, there was no preposition, there was no connector word in front of night. Okay. But we just, as we look at the sentence and think about it, in my prayers, night doesn't make sense as a full phrase. Night should be a separate, put on as a separate phrase. Okay. Now, if you had left it there, in my prayers night, on your diagram, that's okay. But it'd be just a little bit confusing when you get to and day. Or he could have said this. He could have said, what if he had said, in my prayers, always? What about that? What is always doing here?
When, yeah, when.
Same thing. Yeah. So I would put this on a separate line, modifying remember. When I remember, always. Where do I remember? In my prayers. Or in my prayers, frequently. Okay. Again, there could be many words that sort of describe a time element here that don't modify, they don't go with the phrase in my prayers, but it's modifying remember in this case. How often or when do I remember? Frequently. Where do I remember? In my prayers. And he even emphasizes this, doesn't he? He says, in my prayers, night and day. And notice what's the word that he gives before remember?
Ceasing.
Unceasingly. So he's emphasizing this idea, isn't he? Unceasingly, night and day. Okay. All of that really is modifying remember.
Oh,
And again, this is giving emphasis then. I unceasingly, that is, I always remember you in my prayers, night and day. Now, night and day, that's also something else we learned about in poetry, didn't we? Is he literally saying that he's praying night and day?
it's what's that term? What's that term?
Do you remember?
Metaphor?
Not a metaphor. It does start with an M though.
In
Metonymy?
Nitenom isa.
Metonymy is when one thing replaces something else. What was
It's
that?
Encompasses.
What was that term?
everything.
Yes. You remember the one that like encompasses like both extremes?
Yeah.
So it starts with an M.
Merism.
There it is. Who said that?
Mirisi.
Was Vicmar? Was that you? You get a special
Ah,
prize.
yes.
Free tuition fee.
Yeah. No. Yeah, merism is, remember, like day and night, heavens and earth, from the east to the west, forever and ever, right? These are like a combination of words that emphasize it's all encompassing. So Paul isn't saying here that he's praying 24 hours a day, but he's emphasizing that he prays a lot, right? That's the idea. But he uses a merism here just to express that idea. In addition to this adverb, unceasingly or always, would be another way to say that. Okay, but because night and day express a time telling when, I put it on a separate line because it doesn't go within my prayers. It's actually describing a time. Okay, he could have said in my prayers at night, right? Then we would have said, oh, there's the preposition at, that we would have put it on another line, right? Because of the preposition. But actually it's describing a time, isn't it? Or he could have said in the night.
That Pastor Tim, at night, it's literal sense or the same reason.
Yeah. Now, if he had said at night, that would probably be more literal, unless he says at night and at day, then it's the same. It would be a merism most likely. But if he had just said in my prayers at night, then that would sound like a more literal, like he says, you know, he prays at night, and when he prays at night, he remembers them. But here he uses a merism, and Paul likes to do this. You'll see a lot of merisms in Paul's writings, because we see night and day. So here's a good example, guys, of even though we are in an epistle, right? This is a 2 Timothy. There are still what you learned, what we talked about when we studied poetry. You can still apply that here, because you can notice, hey, notice Paul here says, not only does he say unceasingly, but then he says night and day, I remember you. Now, obviously, he's not speaking literally here, but he's using this, and I wouldn't say merism in my sermon, but he's using this term night and day to emphasize that they are in his prayers continuously. And I could mention that this is a point of emphasis for Paul. How do I know that? Because he's using a poetic device, merism, which I know from my understanding of poetry is a way to bring emphasis to something or to describe the importance of it. Okay. So there's a lot of examples in the epistles where we can see poetic devices being used. And by understanding how they're used in poetry, we can apply those same ideas in "O foolish Galatians." Okay, that's a poetic device. Remember? We called it apostrophe or direct address. And remember, we said that is a more intimate way to express something, a more emotional way. Like if you say, oh, you know, oh, brother Jesse, that's a more emotional expression, right? And so when we see him say, oh, foolish Galatians, we know that Paul is there's a lot more emotion in that statement because he's using a poetic device in order to express something. Okay, so keep, pay attention to those things. You'll see them, sprinkled here and there, and that can give you more insight into the tone, where the author's giving emphasis, things like that. Okay. The more I studied Hebrew poetry, the more I realized, especially Paul uses it a lot. And actually, there are some examples of chiasm that Paul uses. Some examples, I think, of parallelism. Ephesians 1, it looks, he's constructed it more like a psalm of praise. Romans 8, there's several merisms there, right? When he talks about the love of God, neither height nor depth, right? He mentions nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, right? He gives this full list of all these merisms. And why? Because he's right. You guys remember this passage, right? Right? I'm convinced neither death nor life, nor angels nor principalities, nor things present nor things to come, nor height nor depth, right? All of those are merisms, where he's giving two things that are sort of opposites, right? Angels and principalities. Angels are, the holy angels. Principalities is a reference Paul uses for demons, all right? Death nor life. Those are at two ends, right? Angels, principalities, those are at two ends. Things present, things to come, right? Those are two ends. So he uses all these merisms. Why? Because he could have just said, I'm convinced that nothing can separate us, right? But why does he put all of these extra merisms?
To give more emphasis and for us to be able, the readers, to paint pictures of the weight of he is emphasizing.
There you go. Yep, exactly. So even as you preach this text, there should be more emotion, right? There should be more passion. There should be more emphasis. Because Paul expresses that by putting in these poetic devices, these merisms. Again, he could have just said, right, I'm convinced that, there's the word convinced that again, so that, the direct object marker. Convinced of what? He could have just said, I'm convinced that nothing will separate us from the love of God. Okay, that's a powerful statement. But by adding in these merisms, he's increasing the intensity and emotion and emphasis. And notice a lot, right? Because he gives 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 pairings here, 4 merisms in this. So he's really bringing the emotion here. And it's an incredible thing, right? He's overwhelmed with the fact that nothing can separate us from the love of God. No power, death nor life, the present or the future, height or nothing. But he says that in a more emphatic way. So when you preach this text, as we learned with the poets, you need to follow the tone of the author. Okay? And that tone, that emotion is evident by Paul adding these poetic devices in the passage. So pay attention to those. They do show up. Right? I mentioned before, I think Galatians 3, you foolish Galatians, or oh foolish Galatians. That would be another way to say it here. The LSB has that, oh foolish Galatians. The ESV, oh foolish Galatians. And notice, by the way, the translators even put in an exclamation point. That's their opinion, but I think it's a correct one. They're saying Paul here is he's emphatic. He's not just addressing them in a casual way, but by using this poetic device, he's bringing into it emotion, directness, intimacy, like there's a heartfelt expression of concern and disappointment, right? Scolding, right? By using this poetic device. Oh, foolish Galatians. Questions on that? Well, that's a bonus, nothing to do with the diagram, but I just thought it was something,
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
okay, any questions?
None so far, Pastor.
All right, well, let's keep going because Ruel has to do some more work here. Okay, this next one here, longing to see you. Ruel, is that a phrase or a clause?
I'm
Are you there?
confused.
Okay, sorry, what'd you say?
I'm confused.
Okay, talk it out. Remember, what is a phrase versus a clause? What's in a clause?
It's a verb and a noun.
Subject and verb, right? Do we see a subject and verb here?
No.
No, there's a participle, there's an infinitive, but remember, those are called verbals. They're not regular verbs.
So it's a phrase.
So there's no subject here. So it's a phrase, right? No subject. And really no regular verb. Now, what does it modify?
Remember.
Yeah. Who said that? Remember.
Me.
You see,
Free tuition fee.
Why would you say that? Yeah, free tuition.
Because it's a participle modifying the main verb. Remember.
oh, very good. Scholar.
Yeah, how is it modifying it, you think?
Tiwasa gina dia, imo nagsugdan.
What do you think?
How I remember you longing to see you.
Could it also
How-
be modifying the certain?
It could go back. I am grateful. But usually we try to just look, what's the nearest word that makes sense? Remember would make sense if there's one way a participle can work. Sometimes participles sometimes can tell how something is done or the result, or it can be I'm going to use a fancy word here, concurrent action. Now, what do I mean by that? A concurrent action is another action taking place at the same time. Okay, so if I were to say,
I think it's concurrent.
I hit the ball, this would be a silly word, yawning, I'll just put it a lot. That's a dumb sentence, but here we might say, well, okay, is yawning telling me how I hit the ball? Well, not really, right? I don't hit the ball by yawning. So it's actually just telling you this is a concurrent action. This is something else that was happening at the same time.
While hitting the ball.
Yeah, while I was hitting the ball, I yawned. I was yawning. But the way I construct it this way, because my emphasis is on hit, right? This is the main, right? This is my independent clause. This is the main action. I hit the ball. That's what I want to emphasize or prioritize. But I also wanted to let you know that I was yawning. So that's not the same level of importance as an action, but it was an action taking place at the same time. Now, did somebody yawn?
There's
So I could have said I hit the ball and I yawned. Now, what have I done here? These are two concurrent actions, but they are of equal importance because I use that conjunction and. So I'm making two statements. So these would be 2 points. I hit the ball point number 1, and I yawn, point number 2, both of equal importance. But if I said I hit the ball yawning a lot, what I'm telling you is I am saying that I hit the ball and I yawned, but yawning was a less important action. I hit the ball was the priority. That was the main action. Yawning was another action happening, but I as the author am not giving it the same importance. That makes sense? So longing to see you, I think here, it could be saying how, but I think it's just a concurrent.
Yeah.
It could be saying how or why I remember, but I think it's probably a concurrent action. It's something else. Along with remembering you, I'm longing to see you. Okay. So we could call that concurrent. Concurrent again just means that it's happening at the same time. Now, if we go, questions on that?
Pastor Tim, can we put while longing to see? I remember you my prayers night and day while longing to see you.
Yeah, describing why he remembers. I remember why, longing to see you.
While
Oh,
Pastor
while.
Tim. Yeah.
Oh, if he had said, I instantly remember while longing to see you. Yeah, that's the idea. Now, there's no while in
Pastor
the
Tim?
original text. He just uses the participle, but it has that idea.
Pastor
Charlie?
Tim?
Yeah.
Question. Can't we consider longing as a list together with remember?
That I remember and I longing.
Yes.
Oh,
Could if he had said, and let's see, I'll do here. If he had said, and I long to see you, then that would have been coordinate with remember. As I remember you and as I long to see you. Okay, but he didn't say it that way. He said longing to see you. He intentionally used the participle. So remember, participles are verbals, and they are subordinate to something else in the sentence. They always modify, in other words.
Okay.
Okay, so because he used the participle, then just the way participles work, both in English and for the most part in Greek, is they modify. So they come under something else. That's why I was saying here, I hit the ball yawning a lot. Yawning is a participle, so it's subordinate. It's not as the same level as the main clause. But if Paul had said, as I remember you and as I long to see you, okay, that would have been two equally important statements. Okay, but instead, by using this participle longing, he's actually telling us this is something that's happening, but the idea, the verbal idea of remember is the more important thing he's communicating. Just from looking at this grammatically, regular verbs are participles are subordinate. They come under, they modify something else. So they're not the same level or importance or priority as a regular verb. That makes sense?
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Okay. So yeah, whenever you see a participle, think this is a modifier. It's modifying something. It's subordinate to something. else in the sentence. And in this case, I think remember makes the most sense as it's describing a concurrent action. As he remembers, he's saying longing to see you. And then we're given another verb here. Right? Having remembered, another participle. So Ruel, we'll have you do one more here. Having remembered your tears.
It's a phrase.
It is a phrase because again, there's no subject here. And we have this participle, having remembered. Now it's a participle, so I know it's modifying something. What do you think it's modifying?
Longing to see, as I remember.
Could be to see, it could be longing. Longing to see you, having remembered your tears. What do you think? Is he?
Longing.
And again, think about what question it's answering here. How might it modify longing?
How?
Yeah,
When?
or I think
Having
why?
remembered.
Why was he longing to see them? Because he remembered their tears.
Remember that.
So, and you may not be sure, at this point, right? You're just, but you could put it could be how or why. That's fine. All right, we got two more. I'm gonna have John do the next one. So that I may be filled. What do you think, John?
It's a clause, Pastor Tim.
Okay. It's a clause because we have the verb I may be filled and then the subject I.
Subject.
What kind of clause?
Subordinating. Yes. Independent subordinating clause.
Okay, it's subordinating, so it would be dependent, right? Because so that,
Dependent, sorry.
yeah. And what is it modifying?
It is modifying. Wait, I'm sorry. Maybe filled with joy. I will remember your tears. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I separated with. So let me take this out for a minute.
There. I remember longing to see you.
Yeah, I think so. And telling us what?
Telling us
Why?
why.
Purpose man. So that.
Yeah. So that, right? So that's always going to give us a purpose or a result. In this case, purpose, the reason, why. And then with joy, John, where does
With
that?
joy
bring-
is the prepositional phrase.
Yes.
Modifying maybe filled.
Yeah. Good. Telling
Filled with what?
filled with what or
Or
so how you're filled, I
how
think would be the. Okay, good. You want to try the next statement
Okay.
there, verse 5?
being reminded of that one's also a phrase.
Yes, because this is a participle, remember, the beginning of
Yeah,
it.
it's a participle.
And then what's it
Remind-
modifying?
To the joy. Uh,
Yeah.
I think it's so that I may be filled.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe filled. Telling,
Uh, why also? Why? I think,
yeah, why? Yeah,
Longing to see.
yeah.
Why?
Why?
good. Okay. Now within you, is that a phrase or clause?
That one is a phrase.
And what does it modify?
It
Faith.
modifies faith.
Yes.
Where? Telling where or
Telling,
what kind?
What
yeah,
time?
what kind?
What
It
kind?
seems like aware, but it's
Yeah.
really telling what kind, which faith, that faith within you, that
Which faith?
here's a which first dwelt. Is this a phrase or a clause?
That's a which? It's a phrase.
Okay. Again, we check. Is there a verb here?
There's a verb, but
Yeah.
there's no
Well, is there a
subject.
subject?
No.
Okay, remember, which is a pronoun, it's a relative pronoun, so it is actually can function as a subject.
Okay. So it's a
So it is a
clause. Modifying faith.
Yeah, modifies faith. Again, telling which faith.
Which faith?
All right. In your grandmother,
That one is a phrase.
yes, modifies,
Well,
Modifies dwelt.
yeah. Good. Telling,
Which
where?
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 Where.
Where do I
where it
begin?
dwelt. Okay, and because we have and here, it's gonna be the same
Mm.
thing for the next as well, right? They're both two phrases, both modifying the same thing. Okay, how about this last? I'm convinced that it is in you as well.
That one is a clause.
Yes. What kind?
It's a coordinating. De- de- dependent clause.
Okay, it's-
Check and conjunction. So it would be
notice we have a
to-
conjunction here.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah, it's dependent. Sorry.
It's talking
Okay, well,
about the faith.
what's that conjunction connected to then? So it has to connect to another dependent clause, right? If you're saying it's
Yes.
dependent,
Being reminded.
okay, that's a phrase, it's not a dependent clause.
I think the clause which first dwelt. I'm not sure.
Okay, so then you would say, and which I am convinced that it is in you as well.
Which first dwelt, and I am convinced in you. Oh, really?
Which,
Yeah,
Yeah, being reminded.
well, again, this is a participle phrase, all right? So the and is gonna connect to the same, to something that's grammatically equal, right?
yes.
Oh yeah. Oh.
So it can't be connected to a phrase, participle
Yes.
phrase.
Clause
Now, he
is
had
the
said-
nearest clause is which first dwelt.
Okay. So that's which first dwelt. So then it'd have to be, the implied idea is which I am
Which I
convinced.
am convinced that is in you as well. So murag, we can understand it now. The faith that dwelt.
I'm convinced. Is it maybe connected to the first No, because it's an independent clause.
Well, it could be an independent clause, right?
I think
Yes,
it's
independent clause,
independent.
Pastor Tim.
So that's what I would go with initially.
Hmm.
Because
Yes,
there's,
independent. Because of and, it's equal coordinating conjunction.
yeah, so it's got to connect to another clause, right? Because this is a clause. But then you got to go back and say, okay, which clause
Mm.
makes the most sense? It could be this one, or this one,
Ayan, sincerely, that one.
or this one, or this one. Right? These are the clauses in this. So then you got to just sort of look and see, okay, what does it make sense that it's goes with which first dwelt? So you say, then you'd have to have that idea would have to be which I'm convinced.
But he is emphasizing about the faith, Pastor Tim, right?
Yes. So if it could be this idea, right, and of which I'm convinced it is in you as well, that would then be dependent. And that could make sense. So there's an implied idea also, which first dwelt in your grandmother, and of which I'm convinced it is in you as well.
Referring to the faith
Yes.
and hypothetical faith.
So here's a time where I might go to the interlinear and see if that gives me some insight. But we are out of time.
Okay. Yeah,
But let me see.
I'm convinced that it is in you as well. Independent clause.
Let's see what the interlinear says just before we. Okay, now, if you guys can see this.
Independent.
Yeah, notice he says now, or it's a conjunction here. Could be and or but. I am persuaded. It's a regular verb, right? Perfect indicative, middle voice.
Yeah.
I'm persuaded, and I'm persuaded it is in you also. So there's nothing here in the interlinear that tells us there's like that it's dependent, but that does not mean it's not dependent. It just, there's no like pronoun or connector word that leads us that way. But if you think about what's being said here, perhaps the idea of which first dwelt in your grandmother and your mother, and which I'm convinced is in you as well. That could be the idea also. But you can leave this, it's okay to not be sure. All right. This step is just, when we get to this step, this is the hardest step in the diagram, right? Where you're having to think about, okay, where does this phrase or clause go? What's it doing here? So this is the most challenging part of it. And so you may not be sure. Just take your best guess and then go to the next step. Think about it, see what seems to make sense. But don't spend 20 minutes trying to figure it out. Just give your best idea. And then as you get more understanding of the passage, you may get an insight down the road or from a resource or something that will help. My thinking is, the reason the diagram I think is helpful is it forces us to think about this. It forces us to ask these questions. Okay? Because if you think about it, if it's an independent clause, that means this is a separate point by Paul, right? But if it's dependent, that means it's part of a point that he's making. So that's why this matters in answering the question. Is he making a new separate point, or is it part of what he's been saying in a subpoint?
Could it be, Pastor Tim, like it's an independent clause, but it's not another point. The idea is dependent to the previous statements.
Yes. Remember, there's the grammatical, when we're trying to interpret something, you have the grammar, and then you have the semantics. That is, the grammar is, what rules are being followed as far as the language is concerned. But then there's this idea, okay, what's the meaning here? And sometimes in grammar, we don't say things exactly correct. Or, right? It just, as we communicate. So there are many times where the meaning or the idea, like I said, in this case, the idea of which I'm convinced it's in you, that could be the idea Paul's expressing here. He just didn't add that additional pronoun, but that's what he's talking about. So you just have to be able to make a case exegetically as you're studying the text that yes, the grammar leads me to this idea, but I can see here by what the words around it that perhaps this is the idea of what Paul is saying. So, but the diagram is just forcing us to have to ask these questions, which I think is a valuable exercise, because now you're trying to determine how everything fits within the passage. And then from that, you gain an idea of, okay, what's the structure of this passage? And then from that, it leads us down how we would outline the text, or how the author is outlining it, and we would follow his direction as we consider, okay, what's the main, the most important point, the priority point he's making, the focus of the passage, and then how has he structured that, right? The what, why, how. The what and the why encompass the main idea of the passage, and the how is the outline. How is it structured? How does he communicate that particular point? So the tone of the whole of verses 3 to 5, I think, is governed by that first statement, I am grateful to God. Okay, that's sort of the main thought he's giving, and everything else sort of comes under that. Then you just have to ask at the end, is he saying, I am convinced it is in you as well? Is that a main point, or is it part of something he has said underneath it? And it seems to more go with the faith within you, which first dwelt in your mother, grandmother, mother, and I'm convinced it's in you. That all seems to go together, doesn't it? So perhaps maybe he expressed that last one like a independent clause, but perhaps it really is functioning more as a dependent clause as you think about what else he has said. So that's an exegetical decision, not a grammatical one in that case. Grammar helps guide us, but we still have to think about, okay, what is the meaning here? Does that make sense? You guys follow me?
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
So next
Yeah.
week we'll just connect this. This is the hardest part, and after you've done this, the diagram is easy. It's just you're following what. So for example, here, the actual diagram itself then becomes pretty straightforward, right? I am grateful is an independent clause, so it's to the left. I am to God grateful, right? Because we said this modifies am, telling where. Whom I serve, that modifies God, right? And that's telling who. Okay. Let me see here. Let me just do this. Right, this is direction. And then we have with a clear conscience. Remember we said that's modifying serve. So it's telling how I serve. So I'm going to put it under serve. This clause I said modifies serve, so I put it under serve. It's telling how. As I unceasingly remember, we said this modifies am because it's saying when. Right, so I've already done the difficult part. Now the diagram, I'm just simply putting that phrase or clause underneath what it modifies. I said, remember goes in my prayers. That's telling a where or a when. When I remember you in my prayers. And then night and day. We said went under modifies remember. Okay, so I'll give you the whole diagram in the notes. But this part of it's actually pretty straightforward after you've done that third step. Okay. So, like I said, I got the whole diagram here somewhere. I think I put it in here. Nope. Thought I posted it here. I'll give it to you in the notes. Or here it is. For those of you that just need to see it before we finish. Here. Give it to you there. All right. So there it is. Now, I had put this as an independent clause, but I think we could consider it possibly could go here with the idea of right. So those are two possibilities. And you can put on the diagram, I use arrows to do this. If I'm not sure, I might also put it over here. And then just say, okay. So that's another possibility. All right. Well, again, a lot of details there. I know it's an intense focus on the grammar, but I think as we go through more examples together, then you see the variety of kinds of things you're going to face as you try to understand. Again, not just the diagram. We're not just doing this as an exercise. The purpose of it is to force us to really think about everything that is said in the passage and how it ties together. Okay, that's the importance of this step. So it is very interpretive, but we got to start doing that interpretation. And then as we do this step and then the steps after it, we consult the resources. That's when I think it'll refine our understanding of the text. Ruel, did you have something?
No, Pastor Tim.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thought did you say something? Okay. Any final questions or thoughts before we finish up for today?
I'm done enrolling, Pastor. I include the enrollment online.
Online?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. The online enrollment of
Done.
modules.
Oh,
We're done.
thank you. Yeah, I noticed that. I think all you guys did, or most of you, but yeah, there's still about 6 or 7 guys that still haven't. So I just need to send a reminder out. But thank you. Thank you for taking care of that. Oh, and sorry, Jesse, go ahead.
I'm not sure if my online enrollment succeeded. So how do I know if it was a successful enrollment?
Let me, I can take a look real quick to see. While I'm doing that, I did, we did finalize, I'm getting ready to send out to you guys okay, Jesse, I don't see it, so it doesn't look like it went through. When did you fill it out?
Yes, I think this week, Pastor Phil.
Yeah, maybe go back, take a look. Because I don't see yours here.
Pastor Jess, you can receive an email, Pastor Jess. You have
Oh, really?
successful enroll.
Yeah,
Uh,
once
Okay,
you
okay.
try it again.
Yeah,
But I did, this week, we finalized the, starting the third batch. So I'm gonna send out an announcement, to you guys pretty soon that you can forward to anybody you think would be interested. In doing the next batch. We're still trying to determine when we would start it. Probably will be either early November or early December. We're trying to figure out dates that will work best, but I hope to get that to you by next week. Okay. And then if you want to, yeah, convince any other guys to be, want to convince any other victims, I'd be happy to receive them and torture them as I torture you. So. All right. Well, thanks for your patience and your questions. Really helpful. Let me ask if Jesse, if you could close us in prayer.